Stanisci of NLL World Network on Zingo TV, channel 250. Please remember to download the Zingo TV app at the respective app stores for iOS and Android devices. While you download, make sure you rate and leave a comment, a good one, please. Both apps are absolutely free. Zingo TV is available on Google, Chromecast, Amazon Fire TV sticks, Roku sticks, and also on all smart TVs 2016 forward. Now on NL Lacrosse Talk, our co-host Gary Groob and our guest today, Mick Davis. And I just want to say this off the top. Let me see here. I'm looking at Los Angeles, California, May 5th, 2022. The Premier Lacrosse League, PLL, powered by Ticketmaster, has announced an expanded international distribution for the 2022 season. Games will be distributed in 170 plus countries globally. For Canadian viewers, all 47 games will be available on stream on tsn.ca and, of course, the TSN app. With select games broadcast on TSN's national television feeds, games will be available to stream on Star Plus, Latin America, ESPN Player, Europe, Middle East, and Africa, ESPN Pacific Rim, and ESPN Caribbean, and Frank's Basement. No, just kidding about the basement. It won't be on Frank's Basement. There's a few places it'll be on, but it'll be on there, and it'll be on almost everywhere. Mick, I've heard so much about you. I've heard a lot of good things about you. Some of them I assume are true, and some of them are probably very true. I guess the important thing to ask you is, because we love asking this question, are you ready? Because this is the big one. This is the tough one. What got you into lacrosse?
First of all, appreciate you guys for having me on the show, Frank.
You're
Gary,
welcome.
It's a pleasure.
Absolutely.
And I really enjoyed the opening because that's great news, and obviously we're excited about that growth and the partnership with ESPN. In terms of what got me into lacrosse, I sort of stumbled in. It's interesting having built the PLL. I have the opportunity to work with some folks that are truly legends and pioneers of the game, and others that are just interested in building something that they believe is meaningful, cool, interesting, challenging. I have really, I've been really fortunate to have sort of found the lacrosse community. About 5 years ago, I started working with Paul Rabel in the youth space. Actually, I've been working with his brother Mike for really the entirety of my career over the course of the last 10 years or so. He was a Dartmouth football player. I was a Dartmouth football player. He was about 8 years my senior. So I started working for him after school at a small holdings company. Worked for him for about 5 years following on a couple of different projects, and then ended up linking up with Paul to start what was then Rabel Events. And what we were doing at that time was running camps and clinics with the best players in the world. So we had the Rabel Tour as sort of our foundational property that we ran and really sort of followed him along his MLL trail, running clinics in different markets and servicing those locations, and then started doing things with other athletes as well in his peer group. PLL came along, and we actually ended up sort of tucking the infrastructure of that business into the PLL, into what's now PLL Academy. So, like I said, I was sort of shot out of a cannon in the lacrosse world. I'm probably the least skilled lacrosse player at the PLL offices. I'm sitting here at PLL HQ. I've done my best to work on my low to high, but it's still basic skills, stick skills for me. I learned a couple things along the way on the Rabel Tour, but it's been a tremendous ride. And the fact that I'm sitting in the seat that I am today is, I think, nothing short of pure serendipity.
Well, when it comes to serendipity, good fortune has to be a part of it. You don't exactly get there without some good fortune. But people say that without hard work, there is no good fortune. What's been the hardest thing for you to do in putting this together?
Wow, that's a great question. It's been different levels of difficult in frankly every year that we've been building. I don't know, and I've heard Mike say this before, and I'll just parrot it. I don't know if in 2018 you had come to me and said, "Hey, do you want to build a pro sports league? Oh, and also there's going to be a pandemic in the next 2 years. Do you want to embark on this adventure?" I don't know that I would have said yes at that time. I will say that I do believe that the hurdles of the last couple of years have made us really strong, very resilient. The build in year one, we were just trying to put the thing together. We were inching towards opening weekend in our season, saying we just need to put a product on field, and we need to make sure that we get through the season, and first and foremost, that the play on field is where it needs to be, that the broadcast product is where it needs to be, but ultimately that we're able to get through a season operationally. And hat tip to Andrew Sindenberg, the operations team, everybody that had a massive role in that first season in getting us there, because it was touch and go at times. It was challenging. We learned a lot. I think probably to follow that, I think everybody sort of had the pandemic conversation, and certainly there are those that have had it a lot worse. That was a really challenging time coming out of that season. Off of 2019, I think we had a lot of momentum, a lot of wind in our sails, and then fundamentally had to start to rethink the way that we were looking at 2022. And then obviously a lot of those impacts still continuing to ripple today. But at the end of the day, I feel so strongly about the operating team that we have here at the PLL. It's a lot of really strong, really talented, very hardworking people. I think culture is really a top-down mindset. And if I could tip my hat to Mike and Paul Rabel for doing anything incredibly well, I think they've taken the time to hire the right people and get the right folks on the bus. So even though there have been challenges along the way and difficulties, and look, if we want to get to the place that we want to be in 20 years, we're going to run into a lot. We're going to run into a lot more. There will be existential challenges and crises along the way as we continue to build and grow. But that's the challenge and the fun part of building. So I know that was a mouthful, probably more than you asked for, but hopefully helpful.
No, actually, there's more I'm looking for. That wasn't everything. There's still lots more. When you talk about the hard work and that has to be done, there is also another side that I want to remind folks out there. My appreciation for the hardy breed that are lacrosse players, men, women, children. They're a different breed. They're so loyal and dedicated and so treat each other like a family. And you're getting to the point now, and your league exemplifies it. And that is that there's actually a possibility that it can be a big business too. Part of becoming a big business, you talked about serendipity. I mean, you talked about the hard work and the people that you travel with in this, as you defined it. How important is it for the game itself and how you interpret it and want it to be seen?
Yeah. So, I think everybody has a slightly different answer to that because they have a slightly different answer and they have a slightly different relationship to the sport itself. The thing that is probably most palpable to me in having sort of joined this lacrosse community has been this narrative of growing the game. And it's really interesting because it's a pervasive narrative. And I think that everybody that's in this game, there is a really high degree of passion around the game, around the community, around what it is. And when you have that passion, there's the desire to simultaneously spread it to the masses and get everybody to see, hey, this is why this is so great, and come check it out. But there's also a large degree of protectiveness that comes along with it. And I think I've seen this message in the past, and it's resonated with me. But it's like, hey, grow the game, but also don't change anything at all. And the reality is, there's a little bit of a mixed signal. And I think for us, growing the game is obviously important. Of course, there are the commercial interests of growing any pro sports property, and we want to get as many eyeballs and as many fans into the lacrosse ecosystem as we possibly can. On the other side of it, we need to do that the right way, and I'd say as often as possible, we try to lean to the origins of the sport. It's a native sport, and we try to do our best to tell that story as often as possible, which I think most importantly looks like doing it by way of our players. Guys like Lyle Thompson, guys like Zed Williams, like these are very important figures in the sport. And, just face it, Frank, you say, hey, lacrosse players are a special kind of breed. It's a tough sport. That's not, unfortunately, the pervasive stereotype that exists at least in the United States of lacrosse. And what we are trying to do is show people like, hey, this is a beautiful game. The origins of it. This is the first North American sport. The origins of it are nothing short of incredible. The skill that it takes to play is incredible, and the players that inhabit the game are poetic in their skill. Like there is a lot here foundational to the sport that is important to keep with us as a kernel as we continue to grow. But I think a lot of it comes down to just bringing truth to the surface more than anything. There have been some unfortunate brand challenges with the sport itself, and for us, those are actually blockers to growth. It's not necessarily changing the game. It's bringing the reality of the game to the surface and bringing that to people from a broader awareness perspective. And we've made some small commercial tweaks to the game, just to try to bring it to more eyeballs, make it a little faster, make it a little shorter, add things like the 2-point arc, but also try to maintain the spirit of the game itself and its format. But I think the reality is, our feeling is, if we can package it in a way that a big 4, big 5 sports fan is used to seeing their favorite sport played, they'll see this and say, wow, this is incredible. And we need to build the same ecosystem around it that those types of sports have, because that's simply the experience that somebody has come to expect. And for us, I think, as we were looking at our first few years, and I say first few years just because, like I said previously, it's been a little bit of a tumultuous road just with some of the macro climate. First and foremost was we wanted to just make sure that we had an amazing product. Specifically our live event, but in particular our viewed product, because the way that we look at it, the fastest way for us to grow is by getting eyeballs on streamed and broadcasted product. That's the way that we can broadcast to as many eyes as we can. Now, we're focused on putting butts in seats, selling tickets, getting people out to our games, getting them to really feel and touch the product. But that's really hand-to-hand combat, and you're talking one at a time. For us, it was, we need to elevate this within the lacrosse ecosystem first and foremost, and make an amazing product that our diehards are going to love. We call that sort of really, I think, cultivating the bottom of the funnel, so that those lacrosse fans that want to grow the game, they can go talk to their friends. They'll get their arms around them. They'll bring their friends into the fold. And that's part one. Part two is we need to continue to service that group, but we also need to start to look outward towards growth. Eventually, you're going to run out of youth organizations that you can reach out to and bring into the fold from a ticket sales perspective. How do you reach that basketball fan? How do you reach that hockey fan? How do you reach a generalist sports fan? How do you reach somebody that's just interested in pop culture? And as we think about this from a marketing perspective, the reality is, if you are used to being an NFL fan, used to being an NBA fan, and somebody tries to bring you to a pro lacrosse game, it needs to feel like one of those experiences. It needs to be special in and of its own way, and that's something that we still need. That's something that we still need to build and work on and develop and enrich that experience. We think we offer a wonderful, wonderful experience for lacrosse fans, and we're going to continue to build on that. When we think about 5, 10, 20 years down the road, we want to be competing with the likes of the Masters. And we want people to come on site, or F1, to use perhaps a very relevant recent example.
Right.
How do we get from where we're at today to that downstream product where people come on site and say, wow, this is a really elevated experience. I may not be a lacrosse fan, but I'm going to come for this, and maybe I'll leave as being a lacrosse fan.
Right.
My word, my interpretation. You kind of want to drop cottage off cottage industry when it comes to lacrosse. if I'm overstating what I think I just heard.
Yeah.
Making it more of an industry as opposed to a cottage industry. It's going to be a tough road. Well, I'm first of all, I want to ask Gary a very important question. So, is he a 2 or 3 low high ball, or can he be as high as a 6? Will he get past?
I think he can.
You think he can get past 5?
Well, just having a look at his athletics, I think he can do just about anything. Tell you the truth.
Okay, good.
It's the hand eye that always got me.
Your humility. I'm just throwing your humility.
I studied your Dartmouth stuff, so yeah, I'm pretty impressed. Well, I want to go back a little bit to the beginnings of the PLL, and it really, you guys took a negative and built it into a positive. The negative being the MLL and all the things that were going on there, and the confidentiality problems, the attendance problems, the low pay, no benefits, and you guys took all of that and systematically put it in that made it enticing to get the players first off, because without the players, you really don't have much, do you? And you built a system that was enticing for the players to play, fans to come see, and people at home to come watch. And it wasn't overnight, and things took their steps, but you guys did it. You took your time and you did it correctly. In fact, through the pandemic, you guys were really the only thing that really was working. Like everybody else had their glitches. What you guys came up with worked, and everything was systematically done correctly. Let's go back to the beginning a bit of the growing pains. And Paul comes up with the idea, and he gets you guys in, and now we're building.
What did that take? The building part.
Yeah. I mean, Gary, you hit on something, and what I'll say is this: certainly there was an identified opportunity that we could take outdoor pro lacrosse and improve the experience. Improve the experience for fans, improve the experience for players, professionalize it. And that was just the first step function hope that we wanted to achieve, is how do we get from A to B? I'll say that one of my personal happiest days on this job was when we merged with the MLL. Mm-hmm. I think for us, we never, the intent was not adversarial. At the end of the day, what we wanted to do was just build a better future for professional lacrosse, point blank, period. Mm-hmm. And the reality is, the history of the MLL, there are a lot of guys that gave a lot of time to that league and to the outdoor game as professionals. And frankly, Paul being one of them. The majority of his professional career was played in the MLL. A lot of guys that we're going to be honoring on Long Island, for our Pro Lacrosse Hall of Fame ceremony. And that history isn't lost. And that's one thing that frankly was important to me personally, and I think really important to the people over here, was, that history is really important. There have been a lot of really great players that have given a lot to the game to get us to this point. And frankly, I think it's something that you see in a lot of pro sports leagues, right? It's the old playing for pizza adage. This is sort of what it takes, and there are the trailblazers that get you to this point. So I think that was first and foremost. And with Paul, you had somebody that has, and I will pump Paul up all day, because I think that he's a special talent on field, but then also as a professional and one of my close friends. But you had somebody that has really had a unique impact on the sport of lacrosse. And you talk about outliers and people that are able to raise the bar and elevate what is possible and what is the potential. And he was able to do that. And so I think he immediately came in with the credibility of somebody that has it and has a level of talent, skill, magic, say what you will, that was palpable. And he makes you want to believe him. And I do believe him. And then on the other end of it, you had the player perspective, which he had, which was, hey, I think that this can be better. And not only do I think this can be better, here are all my peers that are talking about it openly. As we were launching PLL, we were in the wake of, sort of public back and forth on social media between players in the league on accommodations and challenges therein. And for us, we view, sort of externally, as there being really two sets of groups that we're servicing as customers from the league perspective. Fans are one of them. Obviously, without fans and people that want to watch and consume the sport, there really isn't. There's no second part of this conversation. The second one is our players, and it's important to us that we're continuing to elevate the player experience, that they feel like professionals. I think we took a really material first step forward in what we're able to do, 3 years ago in launching the league. But we want to continue to build that platform forward. We want guys to, be on par with their peers that are playing in other Big Five sports leagues.
Right.
Now, it's not going to happen overnight, and it's going to take time, and it's going to take continued buy-in. But we feel really strongly, and I think really proud around what we've been able to build from a player experience perspective, but also really excited about what there is for the future, because there's still so much green grass in front of us, in front of our athletes.
Now, something we haven't talked about is every other league has home teams. Mm-hmm. You guys have teams, and you roll from place to place to place, in essence, giving people who would never get a chance to see a game live. Personally, I think it's a great idea. How has that worked, as opposed to people thinking traditionally, nope, you have to have a home team. There has to be here. You're not going to have any loyalty. I disagree. I think what you guys are doing is fantastic.
I really appreciate it. I'll say, sitting in my shoes, because two of sort of the core things that I think about every day are, I call it tickets and tune-in, putting butts in seats and making sure that you have eyeballs on sets, that people are watching games on television or on their streaming devices. It's definitely a push-pull. There are benefits to being geo-based in a city. There is a level of sort of affinity to local teams that is real, especially in being able to sell tickets and get people out. Our opinion going into building the PLL, which has not changed, though the market continues to grow, and who knows, there's an inflection point downstream that could change this. Mm-hmm. But our opinion going in was outdoor lacrosse was not at a place where it could support geo-based teams. So it just wasn't popular enough, and it wasn't commercially viable. Mm-hmm. So using that, that was sort of the initial justification for going tour-based. I think also the uniqueness of having a true league-based entity that was on tour was unique to us. And I think it's something that, to your point, Gary, we looked at the Final Four model, and you view that as sort of the pinnacle experience in lacrosse. And when you think about it from, an attendance perspective, fanfare, pageantry, it really still is. We are trying to use that as a model and try to build 14 versions of those over the course of a season. Sure. I could bore you with sort of the infrastructure and how we think about that, from hiring and building and developing our ticket sales teams and things of that nature. But what I will say is, when we go into a market, I think there's still so much that we can continue to do in those markets. And, I'll again sort of point to, what F1 does, right? And now they have decades and decades of experience under their belt, and tons of infrastructure. We want to continue to build our footprint out in the cities that we're going to on an annual basis. And each year, I think we need to continue to get a little bit deeper. I'll say one of the, just like sharing a little bit of data, and looking at sort of the historical change in demos for us. We have access to a lot of sort of the old MLL ticket sales data, just because we've merged together and we have that information. We've materially grown the 18 to 35 demographic, both from a viewership perspective, as well as an on-site ticket purchaser perspective, which was nearly non-existent in the MLL years. We know that for us, that is a sign of success and a healthy organization. Mm-hmm. But what that requires us to continue to do is drive really dedicated efforts into the cities on a 365 day basis each year. We can't say, hey, here's our tour every year, and we're going to give it a few months to sell each of those venues. And hey, by the way, we're coming, save your dates. For one, people are planning a lot farther in advance of those dates, oftentimes on a 12-year basis, especially when you're talking about parents. Part two, people that live in cities, people tend to be routinized, but there's also, I think, a high degree of affinity from people that inhabit cities. They want to support the city itself. And if we're showing that we're supporting, we're coming out, we're running free clinics, we're engaging with the community, we're building the local lacrosse team outside of our game weekends. When that game weekend comes, it's going to be ultimately a richer experience because we've had our athletes in those markets, meeting families, getting to know, and that's part of relationship building, just on a more macro basis with the cities that we're attending.
Yeah, when you talk about this Seminole experience, what I'm hearing is for example, F1 as popular as it is, I don't know how popular it's been in the States historically, but here in Canada we have one city, Montreal, that has F1. Now Miami brings F1 in, and the world's going crazy, in Florida and Miami, that F1 is coming. What is it that you think, aside from, there aren't F1 clinics in Miami, in New York, that kind of thing. So that kind of relatable thing isn't what I'm asking, but what I am asking is, there's the seed that you plant. What is the seed aside from the obvious, which you already stated, which is clinics and such, so that people will be transportable from their hometown to go to wherever your event is? Because like F1, that's what you guys do. You have a traveling road show, and you have to find a way to let people know where and when you're going to be there. How does that work?
Yeah, so it's a good question. I think we feel really strongly about our abilities to communicate with our audience across our owned and operated platforms. So, I think our social team does social as well as anybody. I think from a sort of media perspective, we were born in a new media era, and with that top of mind. So when we talk about sort of one-to-many communication, it's definitely a strength of the league, and it's something that we've been able to frankly build ourselves and build our brand upon. When we talk about really building fandom within individual markets, there is definitely some spillover value that you get from that. It's important to continue to build the brand at the top. But when you get into the markets, a lot of it really is blocking and tackling. It's hand-to-hand combat. And when I say some of the benefits of being in market, person-to-person interaction, when we come to Los Angeles, as an example, we have our headquarters here. We have our sales team based out of Los Angeles. The ability to simply reach out to your network, go and meet somebody, shake somebody's hand, that's meaningful. I mean, even dating back to my days at Rabel Tour, when we were doing youth lacrosse events across the country, when I was calling somebody in Denver from San Francisco to say, hey, Paul Rabel's coming, do you mind sending out an email on our behalf to try to get some kids out? It's a great experience. It was difficult. It was really difficult. And I found that when I was able to get to that market and shake that person's hand, look them in the eye and say, hey, I'm a real person. And there's something behind all of this. It just developed a lot more trust. And I think that relational equity is important. And it happens off of tons of tiny interactions. It really is one-to-one. One of the things I've learned in building this business in the last couple is there are no silver bullets. As much as you want to look for one, it's a fun thought exercise, but there's no one thing that's going to take you to the moon. It really does take lots of bites of the apple, or many bites of the apple, I should say. And I believe that really building that local community is just that. It's actually being in those markets. It's working with local community coordinators, both within the lacrosse demographic and the lacrosse space, but also going to boys and girls clubs, going to hospitals, sending players out to those places, getting people to know and care who we are. It's getting people through the gate on the first 1 to 3 weekends by way of referrals, being able to get them in the door and say, hey, come see the product. Once we get you in, it's our job to make sure that you stay in and you're a fan. But ultimately, that has a lot to do with it. With F1, they built the flywheel, right? They're established. What they've been able to do with their Netflix series, materially built their local audience here in the United States. So they're red hot. They could drop a pin some really anywhere in the world, and the event's probably going to sell out. For us, we're still in the process of building and developing that brand and getting to that place. So there's unfortunately not a place that we can go where we can just drop a pin and say, hey, PLL's here, tickets are sold out. We're not sort of at that Coachella inflection point just yet. Hopefully over time we can get there, but for now it's really a lot of blocking and tackling and trying to develop those one-to-one relationships. And then of course, equipping our fans to be the stewards of the sport. And this goes back to, I think, what I was saying previously, or earlier in the conversation, which is when we think about building and generating net new fans, I'm a big believer in Seth Godin, sort of a marketing guru. And he always talks about servicing your top 100 fans or your top 1,000 fans. And I view that, I call that the bottom of the funnel. So as long as we have a really great bottom of the funnel, meaning we're servicing those fans in a great way, and doing it to the best of our ability in such a way that nobody else can, they're ultimately going to be mavens for us, and they will do a lot of the word of mouth marketing. We spend a lot on social media marketing. We spend a lot on programmatic marketing, a lot on digital, out of home, et cetera. And you can build, sort of customer acquisition models based off of that and say, hey, we spent X dollars here. We have this many actions taken on it. Something that's, not easy to track, but is our most powerful mechanism for growth is just word of mouth. And that comes a little bit from a guttural instinct that, hey, what we're doing by way of a product and what we're putting out on the field is good enough that people are going to tell their friends about it and bring them in. And so far, so good on that front.
No, you know what you're describing is a saying in every sport. The ball moves faster than the player. And if you can make, passing that ball, it goes from player to player a lot faster than players go to players. So the bottom of the funnel is really important.
Absolutely.
Now, I was lucky enough when you guys came up to Canada just to have a weekend in Hamilton and watch this live. And it was a class act from top to bottom, beginning to end. Are you coming back to Canada? Because you have a good fan base. You have a lot of players from here too.
Gary, I wish there were more of you, and I wish there were more of you at the game. We'd still be there. The answer is yes. We will be back to Canada. I don't think it's an if. It's just a when. When we talk about going back to the sort of top of the call, Frank, when you were kind of rattling off some of the statistics around the international distribution. When we think about international expansion, we get the question a lot, like, hey, how are you guys thinking about international expansion? Like, are you thinking about Europe? Are you thinking about Japan? Like, what's the next step? Look at what NBA is doing here. We have a lot of ground to cover closer to home before we start shipping out overseas, and just closer to the bullseye, if you will. Canada, lacrosse being the national sport, it's something we've talked about a lot. I think of our athletes, I don't have the specific number in front of me. I believe it's in the 60s of our total athletes are Canadian. And a lot of them are stars. A lot of them are stars in the league. So when we talk about international growth, like, North America is I would almost say collectively the primary market. We have our stops currently located in the mainland US, but there's no doubt that we will find our way back up to Canada. Distribution was a really important one for us in the TSN relationship, which came by way of our new ESPN media rights deal. That's one that is very important to us. In year one, we had, I think, a couple of TSN windows, but no, we did not have full availability of our games. And I know that priority number one for us, as it relates to Canada, has been we want to make sure that anybody that's in Canada can at least watch all of the games. And then I think phase two is finding the right market venue weekend match for a PLL weekend. I'd say the trickiness is we sit in this very room that I'm in right now on a weekly basis, talking about venue and schedule selection. And we're now we're talking about 2023, but up until not too long ago, we were talking about 2022. And it is such a stew. And if it were, it's it's funny the amount of sort of inbound I get around like, hey, you guys should come here this weekend. And some of the things I hear are everybody wants us to mostly come during the same range of weekends because that's when folks are. And no surprise, that's typically in June before everybody takes off for the summer months. Unfortunately, we only have a few weekends that we can give to June. So outside of that, we have to work as well as we can to work within schedules. Then it's things like MLS schedules for some of our smaller venues. It's colleges and university schedules. It's such a stew that goes into it that, it really is, we'll have option A, B, C, D, E, F up on the screen in front of me based on different small permutations that could take place, many of which are not in our control. There are venues that we run down, some of them colleges and universities that say, hey, love the opportunity. We're just not interested, which is shocking to me that, we're a professional entity bringing, pretty material economic impact to an area. It's just, we're not dealing at all times with purely commercial interested groups. And, as such, it's, I guess it's a really long, it is almost me venting at this point. It is definitely a challenge. But to getting back to your point, Gary, yes, I would say, without sort of putting a line in the sand on a date, it's certainly something that we will pursue.
Providing and being content sound like the same thing, but they're not.
That's right.
They're not the same. And to be able to create, content is one thing, but then to be people's content, traversing that chasm that it can be, right? That's the big challenge. For you guys, the biggest thing that you have going for you is that the game is really good. The fact that you have this stuff together and the way you're confident that you believe every lacrosse player would love to be in this league, and that message that you seem to send, how important is that to you?
It's honestly important. It's important commercially, and also one of the most heartwarming things that I personally experienced in the last few years. We had our college draft all of a couple weeks ago. It feels like months ago because the weeks at this point, they're both incredibly short and long. The amount of content coming out of those, of players celebrating at collegiate practices, at bars or in their dorms, watching, and in certain cases, families watching players get selected. The cheers, sometimes the tears, that didn't used to happen. And being able to be a part of something where now this experience, just sort of parroting what I've heard Paul say in the past, it used to be one where it was, you kind of hit it, something that you did, but you didn't talk about out of fear for embarrassment. To be able to pivot that over and turn it to a point of pride, is moving. Sometimes those are the kinds of moments where in the midst of the challenge of building a business, you say, oh, this is really cool. This doesn't live on a KPI or an OKR or a goal chart anywhere. But this is a moment that will stick with me beyond my career here at this organization. Right. So that's one. The other one is the level of play right now from youth up to the pro game is outstanding. I mean, I hear it so much from the pros that, they're going to high school games, clinics, seeing the kids play now, and it's out of control. I find myself constantly in awe in watching our own games and our players. And some of, it's interesting too. You have the guys that are full-time lacrosse and the ones that aren't, and more have been making the move to full-time lacrosse. Some of it by choice and by financial ability and economic ability. Some of them because they've had to keep up. Because if they don't, they have a lot of guys that are hungry for their spots. And we only have eight teams and so many roster spots. we get outreach pretty consistently from coaches, from players, coaches asking on behalf of players, hey, I've got this guy, he's great. How do I get him on a roster? How do I get him to try for a roster? Or players going, in certain cases, direct them to Mike and Paul saying, hey, I want to be a part of this. How can I try out for a team? And there's a lot of talent out there. I mean, look at somebody like a Chase Frazier, who had a tremendous season last year. He certainly wasn't on my radar prior to the season. He was able to crack a roster with chaos, and he had a momentous year. I don't know if that team wins a championship without him. So that just goes to show what is out there from a talent perspective, which is exciting. It's really exciting because to your point previously, Frank, the play between the lines is everything. And from what we're seeing, the play is only going to get more competitive. It'll only get faster. It'll only get more skilled. And that's scary to think about based on where it's at right now, because it's already pretty mind blowing.
Yeah, with F1, it's the relatable emotion that they seem to exude and draw on and create. There's a passion that I can't even define it for you, but for something like F1 to work, it needs to have the passion, and it does. And it's something that can't be just replicated because you want to replicate it. It's something, I hate to say it, but it's almost like lightning in a bottle, right? And finding that recipe is not easy.
Mm-hmm. And it goes back to, we talk about sort of pre-PLL and the MLL days, and those guys were still competitors. And at the end of the day, the competitive drive of the players that play in this league is, it's a lot of what drives the product ultimately. But the locker room and the players and their camaraderie with one another, it's incredibly important. There's a ton of emotion that goes into that. And we talk about sort of economics and compensation, how we can continue to get players more and move things in the right direction there. That's all really important. That's going to materially move the business forward and continue to support those players and all the long-term commercial interests. But at the end of the day, when they step on the field, they want to compete for the person next to them. They want to compete for a championship. And that's, I think, sort of the primal nature of sport that speaks to all of us at some fundamental level. And perhaps why sport is as important as it is within the collective global zeitgeist. And so fun to watch, frankly.
Totally is. And that emotion is, there's such a deep connection between the people in the stands who are watching the game and the people who are playing. It's a dynamic that makes sports so attractive.
Totally.
Now you mentioned that there's only 8 teams and only so many roster spots. That kind of leads me into today's announcement that Paul had on YouTube about the championships series for February. Let's talk a little bit about that, because that sounds pretty intriguing to me. Especially, you have players that are still playing in the NLL, so there's going to be spots available. So you have your pool of guys who may have not made the rosters for the summer. So let's talk a bit about that. It's really intriguing to me.
Yeah, so I won't pretend to go too deep on the analysis side, because sixes is really it's really interesting to me, and I think the style of play and the format of it's going to be just really fun to watch, especially with the level of skill that the guys in the league have. In terms of but it won't make any roster predictions because I'm probably the wrong guy for that. In terms of the event itself, I think one, it's an important opportunity for us to support, which is one of our core sort of underlying initiatives, which is getting lacrosse into the Olympics, LA 2028. It's a validating factor and force, and something that is frankly, we have it on sort of a proverbial whiteboard in the office at all times. It's how do we continue to get to this? How do we get to this place? We believe that this is important for the growth of the sport, important for the growth of the league. And this is a way that we can support that. Beyond that, it's incremental opportunities for our players to play, incremental opportunities for our players to get compensated. And to your point, Gary, we're not asking NLL guys to perform in this. There are a number of players that do overlap into both leagues. Frankly, we think that's a good thing. It's additional wage, more opportunity for those guys to play, more lacrosse that's being played at a professional level. I believe it's a win-win for everybody. For the players that don't play, it's an incremental opportunity for them. And frankly, it's an event that we're really looking forward to, because I think there's a lot of inventive and innovative ways that we are going to look to produce it and put it on. Many of which haven't sort of fully have not fully come to fruition yet. But being able to play in February for the first time, being able to pilot the sixes format with the best players in the world, and sort of how we're thinking about the surrounding event. It's an opportunity for us also to, we have a 4-month season. Feels like a long time when we're in it, but but relative to other pro sports leagues, it's pretty short. So it's a long time not to be in front of our fans. So to be able to finish the season and then have that to work towards is I think going to be really exciting, but also from a storytelling and narration perspective, is going to be really, really fun on the content side of the house. The last piece I'll say is, when we think about playoffs, I think things get really exciting towards the end of the season, giving people an opportunity to compete for another championship that makes that race for, fourth place finish, fifth place finish, just a little bit more compelling, and adds an additional storyline to the pie as we get in.
So the Olympics are in LA, and your head office is where?
Los Angeles.
Oh, okay. I guess it's in your backyard. I mean, you've got a leg up with being there to begin with, right?
That's
I mean,
right.
we're here, and you must have some hope. I mean, listen, I'm a Canadian. I'm proud of curling. I love curling. I think it's great. It's in the Olympics. I don't see why lacrosse can't be there. What do you think it'll take to? What is there? Geez, we talked. You talked about, is there a magic bullet? What is, if there is a magic bullet for lacrosse to get the accreditation it needs? Is it because it's not as international as other sports like curling?
Yeah, I've been I've been in conversations around the actual process, and I know that I don't want to speak to it in an undereducated way, because there are a lot of folks out there who know a lot more about this than I do. And within the lacrosse community, World Lacrosse, at the different national governing bodies, Paul himself leaning in, there are a lot of people that have made this a personal priority to push towards. And I can tell you that we've made enormous strides forward into getting towards that place. But beyond that, there's sort of a clear path. And I'd say that, the steps along the way that have needed to be made have been made. And any opportunity to continue to sort of promote lacrosse at the pro level, at a high level, continue to drive youth participation, it's only going to support that continued investment from groups like ESPN, to get more linear spots for inclusion. It all adds to the overall bucket.
I can see it happening here in Canada. We're becoming very oriented into understanding, not necessarily the creator's game, but the creator's people, which in turn does mean attention can be paid to the creator's game.
Mm-hmm.
We do that here as a matter of course at sporting events on a regular basis. So it's something that there's an in there that maybe internationally they can respect the North American Aboriginal experience, which lacrosse sprouted from, it came from. So yeah, so there's a lot of ways you guys can do it. I have faith in you. I have faith in lacrosse and being able to do that for that reason.
I appreciate that. There are a lot of folks pushing towards it. So fortunately, I will voice the same confidence, which is just a vote of confidence for those that are working more closely towards it, because I know how talented a group it is.
Yeah. Now, I've been playing around with your app, and I love
All
it.
right,
I think
yeah,
it's
that's
great.
another
I'm
user.
looking forward
Love
to the
that.
fantasy thing. I'm looking forward to all the stuff. It is such an in-depth app. It's one of the most intriguing ones that I've had in a long time. Tell me, with getting it around to everybody, how difficult has it been just to get the word of mouth out to get this thing around?
Start by the name of it. Let's start
The
there.
PLL app.
There we go.
I,
I'm not.
I will say that, first of all, the executive team made a really wise decision, a couple of years ago to invest in product. Brendan Coleman runs product for us, and from Top Shelf, which is our mobile game, which Gary, you may have played at some point, to the PLL app, to just continual development of our website, our web presence, our data warehousing. It's fundamentally changed our business, and I believe that the app has the ability to do that. What I will say with the app is, and again, this again funnels back to that 1,000 fan strategy, which is, how do you make this the best experience possible for those 1,000 fans? And what Brendan really brought to the team was he has sort of a true product person's mindset and approach, which is data and testing, and then make decisions. And he's done a really great job of developing the right sort of focus groups, surveying, and opportunities for us to, really collect data from our fans around what it is that they're looking for. Some of that's behavioral and what they're actually doing, and some of that is what they're actually telling us. And an app has been something that's been, sort of top of the list for a long time. It's also something that takes real resourcing. And we made a decision prior to this year to say, hey, let's greenlight this. We need to get to this place eventually, and we think now is the right time to start building it. The numbers for downloads have, probably outpaced our pretty aggressive goals by 60 to 80%.
Wow.
In terms of early downloads. A lot of that was just around the app itself, but when you think about people checking scores and web experience, it really is utilitarian. The other side, which is Player Royale, which is our new fantasy game, we've tried to figure out fantasy over the course of the last few years and try to bridge the gap of, do we do something that's more pick 'em and you're just choosing a team that's going to win versus the other, go head to head from that angle? Or do you go more downstream and you think about something that's as sophisticated as, the NFL fantasy apps that people are used to playing on ESPN? In this instance, I think that the team really nailed the middle ground. It is approachable enough that somebody that doesn't play lacrosse can come in and select and create a team. But it's sophisticated enough that a lacrosse fan will be able to have some strategic input and have a say on how to form their roster. So that has actually driven a lot of the success early, and something that we'll continue to push over the next couple of weeks. I mean, Gary, I'd love to challenge you following this, so we can stay in touch over.
That sounds great. I have one more thing to pump because we only have a minute left. Is the movie that's going to be in the Tribeca Film Festival, Fate of a Sport, basically the PLL story. That sounds really interesting. I can't wait to see it. I'm hoping it makes TIFF as well, so I can catch it here.
Absolutely. It's so it's not on a distributor as of yet. So the only way currently to watch it is actually at the Tribeca Film Festival. Hat tip to the team that's been building that over the course of the last few years. I may have snuck a peek here and there. I can say that it really is phenomenal. And what would happen in terms of process from here is, ideally we get it to a distributor, i.e. one of the many groups that you would have on your home screen on your smart TV, and then everybody can watch it. So that would sort of be the next step for viewability. And I know we're running out of time here, so I'll shut up.
Well, take a few more seconds, please. Feel free.
Finish your thought, please.
No, that was pretty much the end of the thought. But what I'll say is this: when people do have the opportunity to watch it, it's a really well produced piece. To get accepted to Tribeca Film Festival, especially as a sports documentary, is really challenging. And I think that those that have touched it won't sort of beat their chests as publicly about it, but having sort of that level of storytelling and cinematography within the sort of within the ecosystem of lacrosse and seeing the sport presented in such a way. And frankly, watching the build story from a lot of what we talked about on this call and seeing it behind the scenes, it's illuminating, and it's entertaining as it ought to be. So I'm excited for the opportunity for people to see it and for that premiere, and then subsequently for more broader distribution.
Fantastic. It was
Absolutely.
really wonderful having you here. Thank you for taking the time to join us and help us to, basically talk about the app, the movie, the game, the players, the experience that is the PLL. Thank you.
Time flew by, Frank, Gary. I appreciate it, guys.
Yeah, thank you very much. Really appreciate your time on this, and hopefully we can help you any way you need in the future.
Absolutely. Well,
my email is really easy: candidfrank@hotmail.com.
Can't forget it.
Okay, bud. I really appreciate this. Gary, thank you for this. It was awesome.
Thank you very much, Frank. It's always a great day when we're talking lacrosse.
Absolutely. Well, for Gary Groob, Mick Davis, thank you for watching us. I'm Candid Frank Stanisci. This is Lacrosse Talk, NLL style sometimes, and usually Thursday at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We came a little later today because we needed to get to an older crowd. This show can also be heard on the Spanglish. That was a joke. This show can also be heard on the Spanglish World Radio Network. For Lacrosse Talk, news, entertainment, and other sports programming we offer, please check out SpanglishWorld.ca. Spanglish World. Watch it, hear it, read it, download it, and live it. Thanks for watching, everybody. Pick up a stick and have some fun. See you next Thursday.